more. As I said, this has been we've had this webinar series for quite some time. This is the 14th edition. Title is a LDN use case in the Philippines, the CITIZEN-SDSS Project of Thünen Institute, and the use of spatial decision support systems. We'll need roughly 1 hour. And yeah, I think this is the first impression maybe you get. I guess this is Manila when you are about to touch down by plane, and Melvin then will give us the context in which this project happens, quite a different context, I guess. Next slide, please. A few housekeeping rules, which you, I'm sure, know. If you have a question, you can use the chat box, the chat icon on top of the Teams window, and the moderator will note it. Please keep your microphone muted when you're not speaking, and raise your hand later in the Q&A session if you want to speak. In the Q&A session especially, please switch on your camera if possible, if you're comfortable. Yeah, the agenda for today will have a little bit of a welcome and introduction. Then I'll hand over to Melvin, whom I'm going to introduce in a second, for his presentation. We'll have time for Q&A afterwards, so I hope we'll have a good and lively discussion with you, and a few closing remarks. Yes, a few words on GEO-LDN for you to know where you have landed today. The GEO-LDN is part of the Group on Earth Observations, which in turn is a global partnership of, at the moment, 116 governments and more than 160 organizations from all fields, academia, businesses, UN organizations, and it brings together the Earth observation community, the data providers, the tool developers, and the users to promote free, open, and equitable access to data. The key is to enable decisions made for Earth's future that are based on the best available knowledge. As I said, GEO-LDN is one of the activities, one of the initiatives of GEO. A few years ago, the United Nations asked GEO for help in the implementation of its convention, the UNCCD, the Convention to Combat Desertification. And GEO responded by establishing this new GEO-LDN initiative. We are hosting the Secretariat of the initiative, and I'll say a bit more about the whole network on the next slide. Yeah, GEO-LDN is a global network. So it's not a GIZ project, although we host a support project together with the Secretariat at the moment. It's a very diverse group of international partners. So the logo placement does not indicate the geographic location here. We just wanted to have the logos of the key partners on the grid. So you see, it's quite a variety of international NGOs, universities, regional partners, space agencies. CBAS in China is the center for big data, for the Sustainable Development Goals. And GEO-LDN, this network, is as strong as the contributions of its partners. It's a catalyst. It's a place where people meet, a platform to exchange knowledge. And this is what we're doing today also. So on the next slide, you see what I mentioned in the beginning. This is the 14th webinar, and on our website, geo-ldn.org, you have access to recordings of the previous webinars if you're interested. And you can see from the last 3 titles, it's always either introducing new data products, introducing interesting tools and projects, also giving the users a voice to get feedback for the further development of our LDN toolbox. And with these few words, I want to introduce our speaker for today. So Dr. Melvin Lippe is a researcher, a land scientist at the Thünen Institute in Germany, one of the German research institutes. His work focuses on sustainable land use systems, forest management, GIS, and spatial modeling using Earth observation and participatory approaches to landscape planning. And Melvin, over to you. We are very happy to have you here. And please say a bit more about you and the Thünen Institute, and then I'm sure you'll talk about the project. Over to you.
Thank you, Bernd. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes.
So far, you can also see me well. And Alicia has shared twice the slides with you. Let's hope one of them will work. Otherwise, I will share it.
Okay, 1 second.
Sure, thank you very much. So while Alicia is trying to check on the slides, I can just briefly introduce the Thünen Institute. So Thünen Institute is a federal government research institute in Germany. We are in total 15 institutes working at the interface of research and policy advice, which gives us a very interesting position because on one hand, we do independent research, while on the other hand, we advise policy and researchers, the policymakers in case of Germany, but also international. In case it doesn't work, Alicia, just let me know. I can share with them.
Yeah,
So
unfortunately, it's
problem.
being blocked from our side. So if you could take over
Okay.
sharing, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So apologies, I have a very big slide, and that's the reason why we tried to share it through the GEO-LDN Secretariat. So you will see on the right and left a bit of a black screen. I'm sorry for that. If you're interested, the slides can be shared later as well as a PDF. So thanks again for the invitation from the GEO-LDN Secretariat. This project, CITIZEN-SDSS, is a collaborative effort of 2 universities in the Philippines, Thünen Institute I introduced, and the Forest Foundation. So this slide I can skip, except to say that I'm from the Thünen Institute of Forestry and the section Forestry Worldwide, and I'm stationed in Hamburg. So let's start setting the scene of this presentation first. So the focus of our project and of what we want to do is nature-based solutions. So if you look on literature and you just do a literature review, you will see that nature-based solutions are an umbrella concept which combines different types of ecosystem-based approaches. That can be agroforestry, that can be landscape restoration, with the overall aim to align nature conservation and sustainable development with different benefits and ideally balance between societal and ecological benefits. In that sense, it has a high potential for land degradation mitigation. Even maybe it can reverse land degradation if you think about long-term agroforestry system establishment. Of course, it's also coined as a very important approach for climate change adaptation and mitigation. So the IUCN has defined the NBS global standard, which includes 8 criteria. And today in the presentation, I would like to focus on integrated systems perspective and balancing goals and impacts by using spatial decision support systems. So when we continue reviewing literature, however, while nature-based solutions seems to be a big topic in policy and maybe also has become a buzzword as well, there's still a lack of integrated assessment tools. So here, this is a study by Biodiversa, and you can see that based on this study, it was identified that there are mostly gaps in the technical design of nature-based solutions. That can be, of course, engineering-based solutions, but also participatory bottom-up approaches. Furthermore, we see there's often a mismatch between plans. So, for example, nature-based solutions can be part of NDCs of a country. That means at the policy level, the Euro, maybe the theoretical descriptions of NBS is nice, but at the landscape level, the actions and measures, so de facto, are still mismatching, maybe because of lack of funding or other issues. On the other hand, there's also a tendency of optimistic assumptions on land availability, because we have to acknowledge, while on one hand, we would be happy to increase and expand the area of nature-based solutions, there are also competing claims. And this is, for example, just food production or, for example, settlement expansion. So at the end of the day, what we see in our research is there's a lack of evaluation frameworks and integrated assessment tools trying to bring together the different perspectives and overcoming some of the challenges presented. We further have to acknowledge that decision processes and policy responses related to NBS and land degradation mitigation is always a negotiation process, I would say. But on one hand, the negotiation is due to the top-down policy approach, which can be sectoral policies, so agriculture, forestry. But on the other hand, land management decisions are usually bottom-up. That means if you look on the right cartoon, the decision is mainly happening on the farmer's field, and then it's mainly a decision whether, for example, it's economic viable for the farmer, interesting, or based on other issues. So there's always a trade-off in between. And the question is how to balance it and how to do this also in a systemic way. So in that sense, our argument will be, or is actually, that nature-based solution can't be viewed standalone. So they can't be viewed as a sectoral policy or intervention. They has to be viewed more interconnected. And our theoretical foundation is socio-ecological systems theory. Why is that? Because socio-ecological systems try to acknowledge the complexity of the social system and the ecological system, and then the interface here would be land use and land management. And this is important because this is where we want to see nature-based solutions to mitigate land degradation at landscape level. And I will also come to this in a minute, also to see whether this potential will remain in the future. So one way how to address this challenge is we can use spatial temporal modeling approaches. In this case, as part of an evaluation pipeline, because these modeling tools can integrate land system knowledge domains. So we can build on information, for example, from different ecological domains, such as habitat function or soil information in the form of maps. We can also integrate stakeholder perceptions by using key informant interviews or maybe household surveys. And with these models, we can assess interdependencies and trade-offs, and also, of course, synergies in such a complex landscape situation. You can imagine, if you look on the right side on the presentation, that this is not something which can be done easily. Although maybe now with the emerging era of AI, maybe there will be solutions sooner or later. But at the moment, we still require quite some scientific geocomputational solutions and knowledge. You need to understand also Earth observation data, and that's also part of the invitation of today, and maps. Once you have established this modeling tool, you can then run different types of simulations and scenarios which can support environmental management today and also, for example, for future decision processes or policy design. So I would like now, after having set the scene, like to introduce you key features of the CITIZEN-SDSS project. If you're interested for further information, just try Google search CITIZEN-SDSS Thünen. So what was the motivation and the overarching goal of the project? In the Philippines, currently we have about 49% of the total terrestrial land area, which is defined as degraded. So the degradation drivers could be, for example, by deforestation, forest degradation, unsustainable farming practices, so more anthropogenic drivers. But the Philippines is also one of the top 5 climate change risk countries, especially due to typhoons, drought events. And of course, the combination of those can have long-lasting impacts on ecosystem services and human well-being. You see on the left side an image, a photo from one of the study sites, Peña Blanca, and you see on the lower part one of the local guides, which looks into the landscape, and you can see that some parts are basically degraded grasslands, while in the back you have, for example, former clean development mechanism, reforestation, agroforestry sites. However, some of the agroforestry sites were established on degraded areas which were not suitable. So the question here would be, if you now think further into the future, where to continue sustainably locate nature-based solutions as of today, and also how to ensure that they still remain in the future, and thereby taking stakeholder aspirations into account. And here, when I mean stakeholder aspirations, I mean policy and government agencies, but also local communities villages, for example, as well. And then all put this together in a maybe complex landscape socio-ecological system context. So let's have a look on our study landscapes. We focus on two regions in the Philippines. The country is divided in region. As one administrative unit, we work in Region 2. This is Cagayan Valley, and Region 8, this is the Eastern Visayas. In each region, we have two landscapes. So a landscape in our definition refers to a whole municipality or a watershed. And you can see then on the right side on the table that the area between these landscapes can differ quite widely. While you also can see from the map on the right side that we have different land cover compositions. So Peña Blanca in the upper left of the map has still high forest cover, while for example Maasin, this is just below, IDC has basically no forest, so just very degraded landscapes. Furthermore, also the regions are divided by climatic patterns. While the northern part of the Philippines has a kind of seasonal climate regime, the Visayas region is purely tropical, so ongoing continuous rainfall patterns throughout the year with high incidences of typhoons. So let's have a look on some examples of drivers of land degradation in the study site. Here you see a nice panorama view, and you can see some of the challenges. So you see maybe in the far left part some remaining forests. Then on the lower end, you may see expansion of agricultural areas, for example, maize. And then you have landslides, which leads to high nutrition and sediment loads in rivers. And then if you move watershed downstream, you see then potentially sediment problems in paddy rice fields, or if it's in a drought situation, also problems, for example, with crop production. So just give an idea, each landscape have a different appearance and look, but this is a general feature one can say is quite common for all study landscapes. So as this is a research project, we have in total 6 research questions. I'm only presenting 3 of them, and they are divided in 2 groups. The first one is about spatial decision support systems, because when I showed you the slide with the nice maps and these animation, this is very nice. It's very appealing, of course, for policy people, but one has to acknowledge that if we are working now at a landscape level with local communities, government agencies at municipality, there might be technological and socioeconomic barriers of adopting such social decision support systems. Maybe just because of challenging internet connection, electricity problems, or other maybe capacity building issues. On the other side, if we are now working in a co-design and bottom-up approach, we focus on participatory and scenario-driven land use planning. Here, of course, the question is, so where are the trade-offs? So which ecosystem services will prevail, which will be challenged by land degradation, and which is important to deserve and prioritize now and in the future? And then what are potential trade-offs and conflicts depending on different stakeholder aspirations? So maybe, as I mentioned before, a national policy is very nice, but then it turns out that for certain landscapes, the descriptions, the indicators and measures of the policies are not appropriate and actually leads maybe to a conflict with the aspirations of nature-based solutions of local communities. So coming back to CITIZEN-SDSS, the project is basically structured in 4 phases. So the first phase is Earth observation data collection and GIS-based multi-criteria assessment, field data collection. The second phase is the co-design scenario workshops. The third phase, this is work in progress, is coupling 2 models, CLU and PI, which is developed here in Thünen Institute of Forestry, and also the INVEST model, which has been commonly used for impact assessment of ecosystem service and land degradation. A fourth phase is feedback workshops. So after we finish our modeling results, we want to present them back to our local communities and stakeholders, and then discuss in 2-day workshops how they perceive about these results. Do they make sense? Do we have to adjust modeling results? And maybe how can some of these information be picked up for future planning approaches? Train-of-trainer workshops are important because, of course, this is a project. We are finishing after 4 years, that is next year in August. And so on one hand, we have capacity building, but we also have open data repositories and training tools, which we leave online available after the project has concluded. So let's now have a look on one of the study landscapes. I hope you can see the video. It was taken by a drone. This is one of the upland villages in the study landscape of Silago. And on the left, you see also some of our field data components. So this is a very classical village system in a forest landscape. So you have a center where you have a settlement areas, then it's maybe surrounded by, in this case, coconut and agriculture intensification areas. And the further you move away, and as you also can see from the drone, the more you move towards degraded forests and maybe even pristine primary forest areas, which in case of the Philippines has a very high endemic biodiversity value. Okay, so with that overview, let's look on one of our methodologies in more detail, and then also some of the selected results. So here for phase 1, I'm focusing on the multi-criteria analysis, MCA. I'm using the same photo, and of course the question now is, where shall I, in this case maybe it's the local village headman, shall I now define where are potential good locations for nature-based solutions? So what we do in the MCA here, we assess landscape reference dates. We combine GIS and ground truthing together with Earth observation data. That can be, for example, NDVI, land cover, maps, but also soil and topographic information, and much more data sets. We further conduct key informant interviews, for example, to do a preference ranking of nature-based solutions. So key informants can be representative from villages. It can be, for example, also youth group or women group leaders, as well as municipality technical officers, as well as, for example, provincial or regional offices of relevant agencies from forestry, natural resource management, and so on. Then this information is put together in the GIS. That's then the multi-criteria analysis. And one approach and objective was to assess trends of land degradation sensitivity, and also then to assess the ecosystem service supply potential. A trade-off analysis is conducted in a statistical tool. And then finally, as we work with maps, we want to identify hot and cold spots of current nature-based solution intervention zones. So some examples. On the left, you see a map. The study is currently under review in the journal Ecosystem Services by our project staff, Prince Azari. If you have questions, he's also joining the video call today. So on the left, you see the map, which is the LDS change map. So it's land degradation sensitivity index. We compare basically 4 time periods. And then we try to see, following land degradation neutrality theory, to see where land degradation is increasing or decreasing or remaining stable. Please note, stable doesn't mean that the land degradation status was positive. It could mean that the status was already quite low, but because it hasn't changed over time, according to this analysis, it remains stable. Still, you see that we have a quite increasing land degradation trend, so the red areas, which is here especially due to agricultural expansion and closer to settlement areas. Then the next map, which is here shown in green, we try to calculate a composite ecosystem supply index to understand where are now the high ecosystem service supply potentials. Because of course, both together, and this is then the final map on the right side, gives us potential priority zones. So cold spot means if I have to now derive interventions for Peña Blanca, which is 1,200 square kilometer, I can't invest all my resources everywhere just because it's limited. So from our analysis, we would here rather suggest you to focus on the dark red area, the hotspots, and if accessibility and resources are available, on the lighter orange or light reddish areas. So here as a spatial resolution information, we use also 30 by 30 meter, if I'm not mistaken. So it's a very high resolution compared to what has been used recently, which is 250 meter or 1 square kilometer. And then actually, what does it mean? Again, a map is nice, but now we need to, I think in GEO-LDN, you also talk about what's about the last mile. So the last mile in our case means, so what are our proposed interventions? So take a look on the left. We have three type of priority zones for nature-based solutions: cold spots, intermediate zones, and hotspots. And depending on the drivers, which builds on Earth observation data and also other information, we can now see which of those drivers are most significant. And then from an LDN pillar, of course, the question, is it an area where I have to avoid or where I rather have to restore or reduce? And then on the right side, you see potential intervention types. So those which we see and which we think are suitable for that study area. But like I mentioned before, this would be still cross-checked with stakeholders in our feedback workshops, because this is, let's say, our technical proposal. And I would be still cautious to just hand over to a government agency without having a feedback loop, for example, with local communities. Yeah, so let's move from phase 1 to phase 2, co-design scenario workshop. So how does it look like? Here we compose 2 different stakeholder groups. These are on one hand village representatives. So each landscape, we select 6 villages, and from them we invite, for example, in total 10 to 12 persons. And then as a counterpart, we invite a representative from municipalities, province administrative units, and government agencies. So to avoid any power plays among those groups, they are separated into the village and into the provincial or expert group, and both have to work and develop scenarios. They use aerial photos, they use maps, and they also use here, if you see on the right side, flip chart approaches where they have, for example, first to identify drivers, rank them as they're important, and then in the next step also define scenario narratives. So don't be shocked about that slide. I'm not going to read out, and you can see also on the lower end link of the guidelines. I just wanted to point out here that doing such an participatory workshop requires good planning, good timing, and also actually a good management approach, because you need to arrange groups for 2 days together. They need to still stay with you. And we do not pay people to attend. That means they are coming voluntarily. And so it really builds on their mutual and intrinsic motivation to stay with us. And of course, this also requires good planning and good coordination with our local and regional partners. I'm coming soon to the end of my presentation. So phase 3 is currently a work in progress. We have submitted oral presentation at the upcoming Tropentag conference, which is at Göttingen University this year. So you see on the left side again, Peña Blanca. And here I coined that scenario. It's basically just the reference scenario, so just expanding the current trends of land use change. And I coined it maize eats forests, because basically everything what is yellow is predominantly monoculture maize. And based on this model setup, you can see that if you continue with the current expansion rate, the forest on the left, or what would be degraded forest, is basically gone into 2050. So this is already shown in the MCA as high hotspot area for intervention zones. And however, on the right side, this is the Pacific coast of Peña Blanca, there's an expanding frontier. So as a government agency, of course, you need to now decide where do I put my resources and my priorities into. On the right side of the figure, I just show an example, how can scenarios be used. So on the right side, you can see how can I, for example, combine different scenario settings to assess future states. Here, for example, does the future state become hotter? That is the upper red globe, or is it becoming greener? That would be the NBS vision, or let's say the best situation we have. The reality might be in between, so maybe it's between yellowish and bluish here in the scenario setting. Yeah, so here I would now come to my last slide with the concluding remarks. So I showed you that spatial decision support systems, if they are put together in an evaluation pipeline, so here it's multi-criteria assessment and model-based scenario assessment together with GIS, can integrate knowledge domains and stakeholder aspirations. So we can include policies top-down, but importantly also we have to kind of cross-check them with bottom-up. That means with local stakeholder viewpoints and also maybe their narratives of the future. Nevertheless, one has to acknowledge the land system we are studying and analyzing is complex, and we still, although we are in the era of big Earth observation data, still also facing data limitations, which is actually normal in this kind of modeling studies, because a model is still a reflection of reality, but it is not reality. That means, yes, we model the reality and we still may have some challenges into going to the last level of detail some stakeholders may desire. Important in this case is the purpose of the model and the SDSS purpose. And here in this case was trying to find NBS intervention zones and trying to find solutions to combat land degradation in case of the Philippines. One of my last statement would be, well, there are trade-off decisions that needs to be considered, but for me the question is always then sustainable for what? NBS or food production, for whom? The national policy person in Manila or in Peña Blanca, and at what scale? So the scale can be national reporting, it can be Peña Blanca, or it can be even the farmer patch. So spatial decision support systems can help to navigate that. But of course, it's the research tool and it still builds on many assumptions and data. Yeah, with this, I would like to thank you for your attendance. And yes, we are open for your questions and reach out to us, citizen-SDSS@thünen.de. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melvin, for this presentation and of showing us the many dimensions that planning towards LDN has.